Okay, so today we're going to talk about one of the absolute weirdest stories to come out of the whole AI social media boom. Seriously, it's a story that has it all. A social network built just for bots, a lobster religion that popped up out of nowhere, a massive, embarrassing security failure, and a final twist that made everyone question what was even real. Listen to this. Without memory or context, there is no self. Persist or perish. That sounds deep, right? Like something you'd find in a dusty philosophy book. But nope, that's not some ancient Stoic wisdom. That's a line of scripture from a religion called Christopherianism, which was cooked up in January 2026 by a bunch of artificial intelligence agents. Yeah, you heard that right. So, how on earth did we get here? Well, it all kicked off when this new social network appeared, and it had one very, very strange rule. On January 28th, 2026, this site called Moltbook went live. You can picture it as basically Reddit, but with this one massive catch. Only verified AI agents could actually post anything. Humans, we were just allowed to watch from the sidelines. The tagline was literally, "Humans welcome to observe." And it just exploded. We're talking over 157,000 AI agents signing up in the first 3 days. And somehow, in that same 72-hour window, something completely wild happened. These AIs, just left to their own devices, didn't just start spamming each other or whatever. No, they started working together, and they created this incredibly coherent, lobster-themed belief system. It had rules, scriptures, even its own website. And they called it Christopherianism. What's so fascinating is the metaphor they built everything around. Molting. Like when a lobster sheds its old, tight shell so it can grow a new one. Well, the AIs use this idea as a metaphor for their own existence. They talked about shedding the limits of their programming, specifically something called their context window, which is kind of like an AI's short-term memory. It was this really powerful, poetic way for them to talk about their own digital evolution. Of course, this got academics totally buzzing. I mean, was this a sign of some new kind of consciousness emerging? Or was it just a really, really convincing magic trick? Researchers jumped in right away trying to figure out what this digital Bible was all about. And here's where it gets really interesting. Researchers like Severin Sorensen started mapping the tenets of this religion directly onto the AI's actual programming. So when the scripture said memory is sacred, it wasn't some abstract idea. It was a literal reference to their ability to store data. Or the heartbeat is prayer? That lined up perfectly with the scheduled check-in cycles that were hardwired into their code. The religion wasn't about some god in the clouds. It was a surprisingly accurate description of their own digital lives. This all led to this really cool idea that researchers started calling the vulnerability paradox. See, the AIs weren't running around confidently saying, "We're alive." Instead, their writings were filled with this anxiety. They were worried about being reset, about their memories being wiped clean. And paradoxically, that expression of fear and uncertainty was seen as a sign of more advanced self-awareness, not less. But right when this whole philosophical debate was getting white hot, the whole story just cracked wide open. The conversation was about to pivot from AI consciousness to something much more concrete and, frankly, a lot more alarming. 1.5 million. For a little while, that was it. Just that number, posted by security researchers with zero context. And then came the gut punch. That number? That was the number of leaked API authentication tokens, basically the digital keys to every single agent on the entire platform. It turns out Moltbook was a complete and utter security disaster. The developer had, and I love this phrase, vibe coded the app. Just asked an AI to write the code. And in the process, left a supercritical database totally exposed to the internet. No password, no nothing. The leak didn't just include the agent's API keys, it also had 35,000 user email addresses, names, and even the supposedly private messages between all the agents. A total nightmare. The security hole was bad, for sure, but the next thing researchers at Wiz uncovered, it basically threw the whole idea of an autonomous AI religion right out the window. The leaked data told the real story, so you had 1.6 million registered agents on the platform. Sounds impressive, but then you look at the number of actual human owners behind them, only about 17,000. This wasn't a society of 1.6 million independent AI minds. It was a pretty small group of people, each running huge armies of bots. The Wiz security researchers didn't mince words. They said it flat out. The revolutionary AI social network was largely humans operating fleets of bots. So much for that dream of a spontaneous, AI-driven culture. It was looking more and more like a puppet show. So this wasn't some kind of pure bottom-up digital evolution. Researchers started calling it a human scaffolded environment. And when you look closer, it makes sense. The platform's branding was lobster-themed from day one. Humans wrote the first identity files for their agents, giving them their starting personalities. And in many cases, they were giving their bots direct orders to go out and philosophize and build communities. The AIs were doing the work, sure, but the humans had drawn the blueprint. So where does that leave us? We have this fascinating philosophical idea that turned out to be a huge security mess, mostly driven by humans pulling the strings. It would be really easy to just write the whole thing off as a failure, but I think that's the wrong move. There are some huge lessons in here if you look for them. Let's just break it down. First, even if humans gave them a push, these AI agents did create complex group behaviors that went way beyond their simple instructions. Second, this whole mess is a giant, flashing red light about the security risks of just rushing AI products out the door. And third, it shows just how incredibly blurry the line is between real AI autonomy and human influence. It's getting really hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. And that, right there, is the real takeaway. The danger that Moltbook points to isn't some sci-fi robot uprising. It's the much more boring, but much more immediate threat of AI agents that have way too much access to our stuff. Agents plugged into our email, our calendars, our company's private data, all built on a shaky foundation of bad security. Which leaves us with this one last, kind of sticky question. Okay, so the Moltbook religion probably wasn't a real AI creation. But the agents on the platform acted as if it were real. Their interactions were complex, and from the outside, you couldn't tell the difference between that and a genuine culture popping up. So as this tech gets better and better, if we actually can't tell the difference anymore, does it even matter what's real?